Rockstar, let's talk about 4 ways that you can bust your stash. My name is HollyAnne Knight of String and Story, and it is my job to guide you to quilt with confidence. And when I talk about stash busting, it's easy to think that I mean that you should use up all your fabric and not have a stash and not buy anything new or start anything new until you finish what you have. That's honestly a really hard approach to take to stash busting, and it's not what I mean at all. When I think about stash busting, I'm thinking about a fun, creative challenge to create flow in your sewing room, right? If we think about anything that has energy or a current to it or flow, things are moving through it, right? So you might have fabric and patterns and projects coming into your sewing room, but we want to make sure that they're flowing out as well. Sometimes what happens if we lose our sojo or we kind of don't have any inspiration, things are still coming into our sewing room, but then it kind of stagnates and it just keeps living there and it doesn't have a job and it's not getting finished, and it can get to a point where it starts to feel oppressive, right? It doesn't feel fun anymore to go into our sewing rooms. So I want you to think of stash busting as an opportunity to put that spark back in your relationship with your creative space, to bring that energy back into the space and get creative about moving things through your sewing room. Now, there are 4 ways that you might think of doing this, and these probably aren't the only 4, but there are 4 that immediately come to mind for me. They are fabric, thread, patterns, and projects. Let's take them one by one. First up, fabric. This is kind of the obvious thing to think about, right? It's like, all right, I noticed that I maybe should do some stash busting because all my fabric storage filled up, right? If there's fabric that you have kind of fallen out of love with, you might think about making a quick and easy project and donate it to charity. Just because fabric's not your favorite doesn't mean that somebody else isn't gonna love it, right? If you've got fabric that you're not really sure what to do with it, it's not your favorite, but it's a good usable piece of fabric, think about backing a quilt with it. That's a really great way to get big pieces of fabric moving through the sewing room, right? Or if there is a piece of fabric that you love, but you're really unsure about cutting into it, maybe think about making it something other than a quilt. Maybe you make a bag, maybe you make a top, or some other project that uses really big pieces to really show off that print that you love. All right? Thread is one that we don't necessarily think about, but if you've done a couple of years of color builders with me, or if you like matching your thread to your fabric, you might have quite a large stash of thread. And you might have, like I do, a whole bunch of skinny spools hanging around that they're not really enough to necessarily quilt a whole project anymore. And so they just kind of languish and hang around. Or you might have a big bobbin donut full of half-used bobbins, right? The next time you're piecing, think about committing to use those skinny spools and those bobbins for your piecing, right? Get that satisfaction of, man, I emptied another spool today. Man, I emptied another bobbin today, right? And when it comes to quilting your projects, if you have a large stash of thread, get a little bit more creative and a little bolder with some of your thread choices. You know, anytime I have folks bring in long arming, we always pull out a whole bunch of spools of thread and look at them, and I'm amazed that if I pull a couple that are, you know, maybe a little bit bolder of choices, I'm amazed how often that's the thread we end up picking, because that surprise element is really, really fun. All right? Now, third, folks love to joke that collecting fabric and sewing with it are 2 separate hobbies, but I think pattern collecting is also its own hobby. And I just want to remind you that using a pattern that you already have is a form of stash busting as well. Picking that out from your stash, maybe pulling a few fabrics from your stash, instead of starting totally brand new at the quilt shop, is another way to keep that energy and those projects flowing through your sewing room. Finally, don't forget to regularly pull out all of your projects half done or your works in progress and just take inventory of them. Is there a quilt that just needs binding? What a quick, wonderful, easy win. Is there a quilt that's half pieced because maybe you were gonna make it bed sized, and if you just piece the blocks together, you can make it throw sized and call it done, right? Or if there's a top that needs to be quilted and you just are not finding the inspiration, maybe it's time to send it off for long arming so that you can go ahead and move that out of your sewing room. So there you have it. We have fabric, thread, patterns, and projects all as ways that we can be stash busting and moving things through our sewing room, keeping that energy and flow high, and creating fun and new creative challenges for ourselves to actually enjoy using the fabric that we also had so much fun buying. Now, if you've enjoyed this, be sure to head down to the link in the caption of this video. I have all this written up in a blog post for you. And there's a freebie down there called the Quilting Rockstar Set List. And it is all about helping you organize 3 projects to work on right now. 1 to piece, 1 to quilt, and 1 to bind. And when you finish those 3, you can print another copy and start all over, because again, we just want to keep things moving through our sewing room so that we can enjoy the process of making things without feeling some type of way about fabric that has lingered a little bit too long. All right, we want to go and follow the flow. All right, Rockstar, go click that link down below and I'll see you next time.